was filled with Ronarian theologians, we'd have paradise. No? I mean, it's just incredible. Robert Wuthnow, people know the book, Sharing the Journey. I'm always pushing it, Sharing the Journey. Robert Wuthnow, amazing, he's a Princeton guy, a sociologist, Sharing the Journey. Well, Wuthnow says, did the study of small groups over this period of time, half the people in the United States over a 5-year period are involved in a serious small group activity. Half. It's more than used to go to Major League Baseball games. No, it's incredible. Half the adults walking around with a group where they're come once a week and spend an hour and a half and show support to one another. It's an amazing movement. See, so the whole analysis of individualism in our culture misses that. And we got people mounting the pulpit and saying we have an individualistic culture. We got people writing books. We got a culture that's just individualistic. Well, they forgot to read de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville said back in the 1830s, the genius these American people are that they come together in small groups to get things done. Small groups, not personally, individually. Little groups, library groups, school boards, everything like that. The whole other is a small group movement we have to take account of. So that's the other kind of tension that we see going on, it seems to me, in the world today. A globalism that is combined with a new tribalism. And it comes right down to these 5 people wanting to pray together. Now, what does that mean for us, campus ministers, which is what I want to say for all these things, I guess? Well, tapping the small group interest is certainly part of what we're about, and we do well. We ought to celebrate that. The people who are in your diocese and do it well, you ought to congratulate them. We got all kind of prayer groups. We got all kind of small groups that get together for retreats. Groups that get together for social justice action. It's probably one of the good things we're doing. We're tapping a movement. We're tapping a cultural trend, and we ought to continue to do it and build on it. Well, there's just no doubt about all that. I mean, I was talking to the campus ministers down in Texas, and they had, it was just one person after another telling me about the retreat programs they run. They're wonderful, marvelous, hundreds of students coming. You know, one day they were telling me they have a waiting list. They had put a sign up after Mass. They could only get something like 70 people into this weekend, this retreat. And they put this thing up one Sunday, just after the Mass, very little thing, and now they got 100 names. They have to have them in a lottery. They have them in a thing, pull out who's going to get to go on retreat this quarter or this semester. I mean, and it's wonderful. And, well, I get carried away with this. That's, as Joe says, they're not tapping this. The bishops don't understand this right now. And the new document on which I've read on youth ministry, I was going to say that and put it someplace else, but just they're missing all the good stuff like that's going on. So we're tapping. But then the obvious thing is that what is our challenging task is not just to ride a cultural trend, but to transform it, to challenge it. I got to take this small group. We got these students. They meet on Thursday morning. They come to the house where I live, and they get coffee and donuts. They pray together, and then they have breakfast together. It's wonderful. But we got to keep coming at those groups. The world is bigger than you 9 people. The world is bigger than the University of Toledo. The world is bigger than Ohio, than the United States. There is this global vision. That's our responsibility, not just to ride the small group movement, but to challenge it, transform it, turn it around, open the eyes up, get the larger vision, keep the global vision in front of people. And the vision does not stop at the United States and some sort of nationalism. It's only when we envision the whole human family together that we're right. Jesus came to save all the human family. All of us are sons and daughters of God. All those great biblical themes need to be resurrected in our time and place on our campuses to fight against the new tribalism, to keep the new tribalism open to something larger and bigger. We're going to try to start what I'm calling an interfaith dialogue program before long. I was thinking what a great resource we have on our campuses where we have international students, different backgrounds. I love Hans Kung's stuff. Kung has done great thing on the world religions, but that theme he keeps coming back to. No peace among the nations without peace among the religions. No peace among the religions without dialogue. among the religions. No dialogue without understanding. You go right down the line, a leitmotif that I think flows through. And so, I'm thinking that we got a possibility here of, what would it mean to get, my idea of the dialogue program is we get 5 students from representing Islam and 5 representing Judaism, 5 the Protestant tradition, 5 Catholic. We get them together and we try to look at each other's primary documents. And we try to look at important commentaries. We try to get them in touch with one another, share meals together, and get it expanded. I mean, what does that mean? No peace among nations without peace among the religions. So we got the chance to model this, it seems to me, often on our campuses, especially where we have any international component or any diversity that way. Let's do the one-to-one again. How about finding a different partner? Do the same dynamic. Can you move? Stand up. Find another partner. I'm reminded of, I'm trying to figure out what to do about the time. We're going till 2:30. That's less than an hour. I'm wrestling with, do we take a 15-minute break, or do we try to get people to use these short periods for breaks? And I'm reminded of what Ken Untner said. Remember, when you're talking, no one's quite as fascinated by it all as you are.
Not 15 minutes, maybe 5 minutes?
You got it. Yeah, good, yeah. Should we take 5?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Can we keep it to 5? That we have to deal with. I will head it, the tension between the world church and Roman centralization. I think we're all clear on the centralizing tendencies in the Vatican these days. Appointment of certain types of bishops, strong stands on many issues, women's ordination and mandatory celibacy and so on. The whole thing about women servers, it draws a laugh from the group when my colleague reads that. I mean, it represents a recognition of how hard it is to get the Vatican to move like that. I happen to know ways in which some of our highest prelates in the United States are treated by the Vatican, and if that was ever generally known, it would be a horrible scandal. It's just, it's unbelievable. I mean, the kind of authority that people over there want to exercise, even on our really high-ranking people here in the United States. So, I mean, we're all aware of the centralization thing. The world church notion, again, we're familiar with it, but let me just play it out. That's Ronner's, probably the most famous article or talk Ronner ever gave, was on the theological significance of the Second Vatican Council, and he gave that at Weston, and the point of the article was that we are in the midst of the second great change in the history of the church. First one occurred in the first century, when we went from being a Jewish community to a Gentile community, and now we are living through the second great change, that will make the Reformation look like a minor event. The second great change in which we are becoming, for the first time in our history, a truly world church. So the tag phrase that's gotten put on this whole thing is the world church idea. And the idea is that we will now be developing indigenous forms of Christianity in China and India and Africa and so on. The great model of that, already written up by Vincent Donovan, Rediscovering Christianity, is the Maasai tribe, where he evangelized the Maasai tribe for 17 years, and instead of telling them how you were supposed to be a Christian, he just told them the stories of Jesus. And after they heard the stories of Jesus, instead of chaining their old people to trees to die when they were elderly, they had them die in the community of the family and in the village. They developed their own creeds, their own Eucharistic expressions, their own images of God, so on. Liturgies that lasted all day long, true Eucharist, and so on. Well, it's an example of what Ronner means concretely. We're moving towards a day when we would have all these various indigenous forms of Christianity. And Ronner says that the kind of thing we see in the present papacy, in the light of that, will be seen to be totally anachronistic, out of step with the times, that the centralizing tendency will eventually fail, that it cannot withstand the indigenous forces that will be coming to the fore. And Rahner says that in that kind of church you cannot imagine one canon law to cover everything. You cannot imagine decrees coming out of the Vatican. They're going to tell every church what to do, every local grouping of Christians and so on. So it is a very exciting kind of time, this greater pluralism, greater autonomy for local churches and so on. But what we've got, of course, is a tension between those two things, don't we? I mean, we have the centralizing people who want to move towards greater authoritarianism, and we have, as part of that, a new clericalism that has to be taken into account, a new clericalism right here within our own United States, and people being ordained priests, for example, who are very in tune with the centralizing project and see that as the correct way to go. And we have other people who, when they hear the notion of Rahner's World Church, find a glimmer of hope, when they feel that if Rahner's right, that the wave of the future is more openness, more tolerance, and so on, that then I can stick with it. I can hang in there if I think that finally my efforts are part of a large project of creating a world church for the first time in history. It's worthwhile sacrifice. It's a discipline that's needed. It's a large vision that could keep us going. Well, back at the local level, that isn't just getting played out there. You know, we on our campuses as campus ministers have to try to deal with this. I'm suggesting that one way to think about it is that we should be the people celebrating the great Catholic ideal of unity in diversity. Great traditional ideal, unity in diversity. The traditional notion that in essentials that we have unity, and in the non-essentials we have freedom, and in all things we have charity. One of the wiser statements ever made. So in the essentials we got to have unity. In those things that are non-essential we got to have freedom and celebrate that freedom. But in all things, as we try to deal with it, we have to have charity. So becomes sort of a theme maybe that we need to work with. It's important that we celebrate the pluralism. I think it's, when the empirical studies show that our collegians, as they go through a 4-year period, generally, not all of course, but generally they become more tolerant. That's something good about university life. We should be ready to celebrate that. Generally, there's an openness. People come from small towns in Ohio to the University of Toledo and never knew anything but Catholics and lived in a Catholic ghetto, get out after 4 years, often with a greater feeling for Protestants or Jews or larger world. That's great, and we should celebrate that and foster it. In many ways, we have the tolerance thing. We're doing well with that, I'd say. The playoff, and I was telling Joe about this at dinner, that I often go back to is a famous dialogue between Carl Rogers and Martin Buber that occurred up at Ann Arbor, University of Michigan, where the gist of it is this. Carl Rogers, being a non-directive therapist, was into his usual kick about acceptance. You accept the person, no matter what they do, what they're like, what they're about, background, everything. You accept them. That's the key to human relationships. And Martin Buber said, sort of, well, okay, but there's more to it than that. Martin Buber said, no, in loving relationships, the lover sees something good in the other and wants it to come to fruition. The lover, the minister, sees not just actuality, but potentiality. The astute leader sees the obstacles to growth. That we want to find the ways not just to accept in a sort of mindless, tolerant way, but to challenge. Our young people need challenging to overcome those obstacles, challenging to develop the potential that they have. That was the theme of that conference that we did in 30-degree weather, Dan, with the whole idea that Jesus calls us to life and to life more abundantly, and we're the people who are to mediate that, the catalysts of that, the vehicles of the Spirit to see that that's accomplished. So there's something that moves beyond mere tolerance and mere acceptance that one wants to call the fruit of love, just to see potential. Now, so that's, I attempt to play with the pluralism side of this. The other thing that happens, of course, as part of this rootedness or this ability to see, or what the frame out of which we work, is a new search for identity that we have to recognize. When you get great pluralism, even when you get the world church, one of the great byproducts of the world church as it comes to be in the future will be a new search for Catholic identity. It's natural. It's built in. As soon as things fragment, somebody wants to sit down and say, yeah, but what do we have in common? You're different in this way, you're different in that way, but what do we have in common? So what we're living through right now and we're part of is a new search for Catholic identity. And that's good and healthy. And I would suggest my own tag for that, my own way of going after it, is in terms of the Catholic imagination. It's the Catholic imagination, I think, that holds us together, where we might have differences doctrinally, difference even on important moral questions. There's a way in which the Catholic imagination unites us. Anybody who grew up making First Communion in a Catholic circle, we all remember something about it. First memories, Joe, Adlerian psychology, early memories, absolutely crucial. They shape us. What they do is form a grid through which we look at the world. All the Eucharistic shaping experiences, bearing grandparents, witnessing weddings, all at the Eucharist, confirmations, home masses, retreat masses, graduation masses. I often use this example. I was preaching to at my high school reunion. We had 460 in our graduating class, and we're coming back to celebrate, and I'm the preacher. I just take as one model, one family I know, where the guy I play golf with, Tom. Tom is quite a bit right of Rush Limbaugh. And his wife, Gwen, reads Richard McBrien regularly, has Catholicism on her shelf, and refers to it constantly. That's my preaching assignment, to reach Tom and Gwen. Well, I went back to that whole thing. The gospel was, you will know him in the breaking of the bread. Emmaus story. They knew him in the breaking of the bread. Gwen and Tom and me, we know Jesus in the breaking of the bread. It's in the Eucharistic thing that holds us together. They got married in a mass wedding. They buried their parents that way. They've baptized their kids that way. It's a shaping experience. It holds us together despite the differences. It is so crucial to delineate that Catholic imagination as part of this movement to the world church. And that's what we have to share with people. That's part of our task. I just play it out for you. Again, you see I'm trying to set a framework and not fill it out. But, David Tracy has done so well in talking about that in terms of the Catholic imagination being analogical. You ever notice that Greeley says often, if I understand David Tracy's notion of analogical imagination, then this, and this. So I asked David about it. They were team teaching a course at the University of Chicago, Greeley, Tracy, on popular culture. Love to hear David lecture on Madonna. It's part of one's fantasy in life. David Tracy on Madonna. Popular culture. But anyway, and of course, Andy doesn't understand it. That's the point. Well, that's what David told me himself. And I remember being in an elevator after a CTSA meeting with David one time, and I said, after listening to his lecture, not this last one, because the last one was very good and intelligible, but years ago, and I said, David, do you mind telling me what you just said? Anyway, what David means by the analogical imagination is crucial to us, and that is, I'll make it simple. That is, whenever we understand something properly, fittingly, correctly about reality, we know something about the whole. Now, simply put, if I know human love in my heart, if I know what it means to be loved and to love, if I know what it means to be disappointed in love, relationships, if I know that inside myself, experientially, then I know something about the source of all love, the one we have a name for. We call that source God. We have a name for that source. We know something about it. That's the Catholic analogical imagination. It's very different from the Protestant Barthian dialectical imagination that says human reason cannot get you from here to there. God is the wholly other. Philosophy, science, reason, nothing gets you from here to there. Catholic imagination, well represented by Aquinas, who says that grace transforms nature, tells us, no, there is such an organic connection in the world, in reality, that to know some part of it well is to know something of the whole. The infinite is found in the finite. The one who meditates on the flower can find the source of all beauty. That becomes... we have other ways of saying what the Catholic imagination is. It's fundamentally sacramental. It's fundamentally incarnational. But that's what we hold in common, and this is not strange. I mean, this can be said to Gwen and Tom after the thing. Is interesting. After the homily, find Jesus, the breaking of the bread. That is our linchpin. That shapes us. That shows us the connection between liturgy and life. All the themes that flow out of that. And Tom comes up to me after and says, "Man, great stuff." And Gwen comes up to me and gives me a hug and says, "Thanks a lot for that affirmation." And Gwen and Tom called their son in California afterwards. And they played out the homily to him. They just said, "We're going to check this, about, do these themes resonate with you?" It's a kid who hadn't been to Mass in a while. Yes. Great family discussion ensued. There's what we find. In the world church, as it gets bigger and more global and so on, to come back to the most fundamental things, the Catholic imagination is absolutely crucial. Is it possible to find yet another partner? Try it. Stand up. Stay awake. Find a new partner. 2 minutes. Just an observation made when we were talking about the globalism and the new tribalism, that the image and was presented to me that really captures this to its extreme is somebody sitting in their own room alone on the internet, communicating with the whole world, and yet isolated from the whole world, with an electronic moat around them. An electronic moat that just leaves them totally isolated. We got people on our campus afraid of that, of the installations in the residence halls, of the computer connections and all, that people just stay there and won't be out. That plays up our whole drive for community and our importance of the Eucharist, for example. So there we got the image. I mean, you got an electronic moat while you're connected in with the whole world. In touch with a library in Rome, sitting in your room and never interact with anyone else. So we have to keep in mind the personalism, the community, the Eucharist, power of the Eucharist to gather, and so on. I got to really try to stay laid back here. My next tension is our reactions to United States culture religiously. What does it mean to be Catholic and an American? There maybe would be 4 different options on this. I'm borrowing from Dulles here. He had 4 here, not 15, but 4 different options, ways of being Catholic in the culture. One would be in a traditionalist mode. He picked out James Hitchcock as being an example of this, where there would be a large no to the culture. It would almost be like Richard Newhouse's The Christian Against the Culture, and retreating into our Catholic ghetto, keeping ourselves pure, keeping ourselves sort of aloof from all of that. Be one option. At the other extreme would be the option of someone like Daniel Berrigan, a radical option. This culture is militaristic. As Berrigan said, we didn't need a peace pastoral. We could have written it in just a few words. No more war. Don't have to talk about the twofold effect, the peace theory, the just war theory. That's all ridiculous. No more war. It's gospel mandate. So that becomes another option. Third option would be the neoconservative option, represented by Novak and Newhouse and George Weigel. Crisis Magazine, Newhouse's First Things publication, where you get fundamentally an affirmation of the economic system, a strong affirmation. I once said to Michael, I said, do you think if you ever wrote one critical word about a corporation, you might be more credible? Michael thought about it for a whole afternoon and said to me, do you really think that's true? So you get affirmation of the market, you get total affirmation of the democratic system, and the rub then, the neuralgic point, is the culture war. The third part of the overall piece, the culture war that we are involved in, and we Catholics need to follow the lead of Pope John Paul, who has given us almost touched all the right notes constantly, over and over. Veritatis Splendor, verse relativism, so on. And so you get a strong statement of that as being part of what one needs to do. And then we finally get a fourth group that we might call the liberals generally. Liberals like to look at the democracy and the culture and say we need more of it in the church. Why can't we have democratic procedures in electing bishops and so on, like we elect people in our culture? That's a very good thing. Let's celebrate human rights that we have in our culture, bring more human rights into the church, so on. At the same time, these people are often critical of the excesses of capitalism, are worried about the poor, those on the margin, the growing gap between the wealthy and the poor. So we recognize a standard liberal line that we hear over and over. Well, there might be ways of trying to sort out some of the options when we look at how we look at the culture today. I might just point out, I would locate myself in the liberal camp by and large, but I read Crisis regularly and First Things, and I believe there's something to be learned. And my own reaction, for example, and what I wrote in response to Veritatis Splendor sounded an awful lot like what some of those people wrote. And that is that I think relativism in the culture is clearly a problem. And when the Pope in Veritatis Splendor addressed that, there was something good about that. So that freedom is not license. Freedom is connected with responsibility. Freedom is connected with the search for truth. I think the Pope is right on target. It's a message that we need to hear in the culture. Of course, when he goes into the realm of the moral theologians and said that these proportionalists say this and that and they're wrong, and Richard McCormick tells me, I don't know who he's talking about, but it's not me. I'm a proportionalist, but that's not me. Well, then these people are mad. They're upset because the Pope has entered their world, the world of moral theology, and has not played fair. He has to represent their positions fairly before naming these people as being wrong. So that's, but that was their thing. And I understand why the moral theologians are upset. But when I read the document, I saw the attack on relativism as being extremely valuable. Well, I just say that in the sense because I think it's what we have to do. I mean, if we can't dialogue with one another, liberals and neoconservatives at least, I mean, we got a big problem. I mean, we got to be able to hear the other side. We got to be able to see. Joe said there's no evil empire. There's good people in this church that see things differently, and I think and respond to the culture. We've always had it historically. We've always had the Americanists and the Romanists through the 19th century, for example. Cardinal Gibbons. And you had this fight. I mean, what does it mean to be in the United States? John Courtney Murray, the great fight. Do we affirm religious liberty or not? I always like to think of that, when the dialogue goes on, the Vatican stopped the dialogue. In the middle 50s, it silenced Murray, John Courtney Murray, in a symbolic gesture. He takes the books in his library on religious liberty out. So you're not going to write on religious liberty anymore. 10 years later, we got John Courtney Murray standing next to Pope Paul VI, promulgating the religious liberty document in a solemn mass in Rome. We can learn from one another. The church learned from the whole United States. So to just wipe our culture off as being totally out of it doesn't make sense. And that's often the impression you get. They want to wipe us off as having nothing of value. Here there was a point where through Murray's efforts we got one of the key things, the First Amendment. Religious liberty, finally part of the whole Catholic consciousness as a result of that. Must keep the dialogue open in all of this and learn from one another, it seems to me. Much more could be said about that, but as at least we haven't done that. But it's we need to have that interaction. Anybody want to comment on that? Always had the tension, yeah.
The culture of war, I think, for what I see in our students is much more value-related stuff. It's not as petty as this. It's just plain buying into materialism,
sure,
and popularity. Sure, real basic stuff.
Right. So what we got to do, again, my own approach to this thing, would be to take that dialectical approach to the U.S. culture. And out of the cross must remain judge of the flag. Always. So, but from the vantage point of the cross, there's so much in the culture that is of value. Let's take, there's some obvious things like human rights and democracy, but let's even take something like self-actualization. People know Charles Taylor's book, The Authentic Self. What is it? Forgetting it. His major work is called Sources of the Self. Charles Taylor, a Canadian Catholic philosopher. Ethics of authenticity. That's a very accessible way into Charles Taylor's thought. Ethics of authenticity. But he makes a simple point, which I now buy and probably never saw before. The drive for self-actualization in American culture is an ethical demand. It's not just a me, do your own thing kind of thing, It's an ethical demand to develop one's own potential, God-given potential, to define oneself over against the parental generation, to be true to conscience even if it's not pleasing to parents. All those elements. There's ethical dimension to that. I think that's exactly how a lot of our young people feel. They don't feel that self-actualization drive is selfish at all, or the me decade and all that. They see it as a moral demand. Well, I'm saying that if you look at, and I think our thing is to build on self-actualization, self-fulfillment, all those notions, genuine freedom, and try to put them into a communal context. Try to broaden the context for our people. But just to attack that is something I think that we would want to look at carefully. The ethics of authenticity. I like the title, and I like Charles Taylor's point. Now, you get other things that are obviously we got to negate, and you bring up consumerism, careerism, individualism, hedonism, all things, tendencies in the culture that we have to fight. But here's a point I got from John Coleman that I think is absolutely crucial. And that is, we should not picture ourselves as being sort of, on this, all of this, totally countercultural. Because the culture is ambivalent on almost every one of these things. Right in the midst of consumerism, you've got a movement to simplicity of life, back to nature, all things like that. It's not like us over against a whole culture. We're in the culture, we're part of the culture, and within the culture there are counter movements in almost every one of these directions. Simplicity of life, get away from buying the most expensive things. All of that sort of thing. We should latch on to that and further it. So I see it again as a dialectical process. I'm going to go on to the next one. Next tension is a theological one. I will phrase it this way. It's a tension between Rahner and von Balthasar. Karl Rahner and Hans Urs von Balthasar. Apart from the names, the difference is this, and it's crucial to our ministry. Rahner and Balthasar worked commonly on a project back in the 30s. The project was to bring theology into dialogue with the modern world, to develop a method of theology that is roughly called co-relational. That's the Rahnerian project. How do you relate doctrine to the experience of people? Balthasar broke with Rahner on this very point. Not the only point, but this is part. Balthasar, after having read Karl Barth, great Protestant neo-Orthodox theologian, said the project will fail. You cannot enter into this co-relational situation with the culture. You will lose. Just like Barth said, it will suck you in. You'll end up with a mere humanism. And Balthasar went his own way. Balthasar worked out this magnificent multi-volume work, The Glory of the Lord. Fundamentally, he said this: what we got to do in the modern world is show the beauty of the Christian faith, present it in all of its beauty, and then people will be attracted to it. That's what you do. That is a large fight today. It's a fight. I know somebody teaching in a seminary, a Rahnerian, a woman who feels just beleaguered by all the followers of Balthasar around her. If you want access to Balthasar, probably the easiest way is through his book Prayer, second edition, Prayer. If you're interested, you know that Balthasar was a great influence on Cardinal Ratzinger, and that whole line, and that becomes more and more powerful now. And it diverges at many points, but the point that interests me is the very methodology. How do you present the faith? In a co-relational way, or do you just say, here it is, come and take a look at it? Or do we present it in its beauty? I, of course, on this dialectic, I want to, it just seems to me that in the world of campus ministry, that what most of us find out, we have to be co-relational. We have to show that the doctrine responds to some essential need, that it's meeting some concern, that it's touching the longings of the heart. That, to me, is the pastoral art. The art of preaching and counseling and teaching is to be able to uncover the mystery dimension in the lives of our students and to be able to respond to that through our Christian tradition. I want to fight against Balthasar on this. And I want to keep alive the Rahnerian tradition. You just see more and more people attacking this now. And we got ourselves a major fight going on this one. You can see it already within the CTSA, and it's going to be a growing tension. And we campus ministers want to keep as many of the co-relationalists around functioning and happy and doing well and being productive as we can, because they help us. Those people are valuable to us because they show us how to relate the faith, the tradition, to the real-life experience of our students. We live in a great age theologically. Not since the 13th century have had this kind of theological ferment, stimulation, marvelous giants, Rahner and Lonergan and Balthasar, walking the earth at the same time. It's been a great blessing of God and enriches our work. That's where this whole idea of theological literacy comes in. And all this, we have to work at this. And back in our group discussion, I was thinking that the dynamics are something like this. And I remember being at Bowling Green, and we were very successful with this. We kept preaching all the time that we must have an adult understanding of the faith. And everybody must be trying to achieve that adult understanding. A high school understanding is not enough. Sooner or later, you have to take a course that we offered right at our own center. For 12 years, I taught every quarter, 3 quarters a year, taught this same theology course. And it is sort of like, well, sometime throughout your 4 years, you're taking this course. You might as well take it now. Everybody takes this course. Everybody has to get into it. We succeeded in creating a climate there, which is absolutely crucial to overcoming this religious illiteracy, it seems to me, is climate, atmosphere, that says something I study, Campus ministers study, faculty members study, and students study, because we all need an adult understanding of the faith. It's the climate that made the difference there. The second thing, of course, is the professorship in Catholic thought that I push every chance I get. We have it at the University of Toledo, and we're sitting back here and saying, Mike is saying, well, they sign up, but they don't do it. Well, we've had large numbers of people sign up, and they do it because they're getting 4 credits for it. They get 4 credits for it, and they got to write the papers, and they got to go to class, and we turned out large numbers for our courses like that. They're credit courses, and they'll always be in the curriculum of the University of Toledo because they have a $500,000 endowed professorship that ensures that those courses are going to be taught. And anybody around the country can do this. We ought to have endowed professorships in every diocese represented here. And I'll tell you one of the keys, and Dan, I've seen this better than I saw it before, and that is if you can get anything established, even a lectureship at a small amount of money, then every Catholic giver in your university, every time they give normal money that they're giving to the university anyway, all they got to do is designate it for your lectureship. I don't care if it's a $20,000 lectureship or whatever. Get it established, and that's university money. You know, it's in the university structure, so that when your rich guy is giving $100,000, he's not giving 1 cent more. All I got to do is say, Sam, how about writing professorship in Catholic thought on the bottom of your piece of paper when you hand it in. On our forms for the university, we have things. What are you designated for? Other. We're not on the list. Other. Professorship in Catholic thought. They're giving the money anyway. Why not give it to this? It can be done, but the first step is get the account established in the structure. They ought to be doing it all over the country. I'm not going to stay laid back. Let me at least say a few things about these various ones. I'm on a 6th tension myself. Reminds me of the time I went and gave a talk in Atlantic City to corporate executives on time management. I was late for the lecture. I gave the lecture and I hurried up the last part and got done by 2 o'clock. And I says, well, there I made it. And the guy says, well, you had till 2:30. You know, I said, oh, well, good, we'll have some questions. The first person raised their hand, he says, are you sure you're an expert on time management? I had a regular radio program for 13 years every week, and I finished on the dot always. However, I'm on only 6th tension today. Anyway, this tension has to do with the whole structuring of campus ministry, resources, and so on. It's all the kind of questions that arose. It was up on the board. I was interested in seeing, I made notes for myself, but many of the comments that say major problems were in this area. So we got, on one hand, one option that's being worked is restructuring, downsizing, reduced budgets, all the financial cutbacks, not enough resources, bishops saying they don't have the money to fill the positions, rejecting what they said and empowered by the Spirit about providing for all of this. Secondly, we have the parish-based notion. We get a strong tendency now around the country to say, well, we won't have a distinctive campus ministry. This parish will handle it over here. And these priests, you know, that's already full-time doing all this other work, they'll also take care of the campus. That's another thing that's happening. And then there is the whole movement to subsume campus ministry under youth ministry. The new document is, I have read it, I'm extremely disappointed in it. I was very critical of it. I had the chance to critique it. Very critical of it. Campus ministry gets small treatment, and it's seen as a subsection of a larger thing called youth ministry. And there is no recognition in there. It will say things like, well, our young people generally have poor liturgical experiences. People haven't figured out how to get them involved in retreats and all that. Young people. You know, go down to the University of Florida in Gainesville next Sunday. Go to LSU. You see 7,000 people. Go to LSU, Baton Rouge. Probably see 3,500 people there worshiping. No, there's no recognition of what I consider to be the most creative ministry going on in the United States today on our campuses. Retreats, prayer groups, liturgies. Marvelous stuff. And I'm telling you, in the document, there is no recognition of that. So that's the other thing. We're going to subsume campus ministry under youth ministry as part of this whole business. How do we reach the commuter campuses and so on? On the other hand, so that's one way people are looking at this thing. The other way people are looking at it is in terms of how do we reform what we're doing. Not put it under parish ministry, not subsume it under, but how do we do what we're doing better? No, it starts out with saying we got good stuff going on and we're proud as hell of it. Much of what Empowered said happens at places. We've done a lousy job on religious literacy, let's face it, lousy. Even there, there's a professorship in Catholic thought at UT I'd like to raise up to them. But okay, let's give them that. But I won't give it to them on liturgy, on their great big residential campuses where thousands of students are coming, or on the retreat movement. And it says things like this, that the young people aren't involved in leading things in parishes. I know all kind of university parishes, the only leaders there are young people, collegians. So, reform. The other side of this, how do we do what we're doing better? Build on it. Better roles for women, greater involvement for women. Use women's talents as much as possible. Push at the edges. I love that stuff that Mike was saying. I mean, when Bishop Donovan in my diocese, when we were at Bowling Green, he used to tell me, he says, man, I love that stuff. I brag about what you're doing down there. Just don't tell me how you're doing it. I don't want to know. And I think that was exactly on target. I mean, we have to minister, we have to do. We don't always need a pat on the back. We don't always need somebody giving permission to do it. That's how much of this good stuff has happened. You have to increase that. More ecumenical stuff we use, better interfaith, closely linked with the university structure. At that retreat, Dan, what we did with the young people, I was talking with students from Ohio Wesleyan. They told me about the woman, you might know her, Chris. And I said, well, she says, yeah, Chris is coming. I said, well, who's Chris? He says, well, she's a Spanish teacher at Ohio Wesleyan. She has her PhD in Spanish. But she also is the moderator of our Newman Club, and she went back to Josephinum and got her doctorate in theology. And now she's going to teach theology courses also. Full-time faculty member, moderator of the Newman Club, taking off, what day would you have that, on a Saturday? Taking off on her Saturday, driving there to be with her young people. She wasn't on her program or anything, just to be with them. Man, I thought, this is, we can multiply that kind of experience. Somebody had the foresight to get her, pay for her to go back to school, I guess, and so on. Marvelous thing. How about reforming that way, instead of subsuming us under something? Whether it's the local parish or the adult ministry or something else. What do you think, Joe?
I think you're doing very well, thank you. And
Joe told me at 2:30 to ask him if I could have some more time.
We only got 3 more.
we started about 20 minutes late. So
We did indeed. I had this down exactly to 2 hours. On the plane it came out exactly. Number 7. This is, yes?
Clarify one thing. You're talking about the young adult pastoral, not youth ministry.
Well, I don't know what they call it. Young adults. I just read it the other day.
Which is being discussed at this.
They're discussing it now. Yeah, Dan read off, it's got 4 developmental tasks. I was very critical of the document. I hope someone in here didn't write it, did they? Did you write it? No, I mean, it's not consistent and coherent. Anyway, I don't know what will happen to it. This had, and I think I've said this, I'm going to do it very briefly. There's a tension on this whole process of moving to the center. And the tension is this. As we get more years at a campus, as we get friendlier with the administration, as we can have lunch with the vice presidents, as we're on committees and so on, we have to maintain our prophetic role. The tension is between getting co-opted and remaining prophetic. Now this is the next step. I realize there's some campus ministers, they're over here on the periphery and they don't know that the campus exists, you know. They deal with people who come to them here. So I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about advanced campus ministers who have worked their way into the structures, become part of it, and involved in it all, and trying to humanize the campus. The great tension then is becoming just one of the guys or gals that fit in and being a prophet. And so the point would be we need to retain the prophetic role. I remember a simple way, we've been trying to establish a religious studies committee on our campus, a religious studies program. I'm on the committee for that, have been for years. They edged out a professor who had worked hard on it, and I'm sitting there, I said, do you think that's fair to Steve? Are we treating Steve justly? And what? Well, it was like a foreign question. You know, does it raise an ethical issue within the structure? I mean, is that just what we're doing here? Well, I mean, that's how university life runs. I mean, you edge people out, you know, you get rid of them or find somebody else. Yeah, that's a tiny example, but I mean, it seems like that raises a question. Are we willing to say no to the injustices perpetrated on women and minorities? Are we willing to speak out against careerism and on budget-driven decisions and so on? Are we willing to remind the university of its own ideal of pursuing wisdom? That was the point of it, the life of wisdom, Joe. The life of wisdom. Are we willing to challenge the university to try to pursue that? We could do well establishing ethics courses and so on. Discussion groups with students in particular areas, medical students and so on. Number 8, male and female tensions. Obviously the options are many. One is patriarchy, which includes sexism. Second is radical feminism. I can never say that without telling my one story about that. Some people have heard it so often they're sick of it. But I was in a dialogue with Rosemary Ruther. Oh, somebody recognized it already. Should I say it anyway? Yeah. Rosemary Ruther, so we're there, and I say to Rosemary, who's a biological mother, as you know, good Catholic, worships at Northwestern regularly. Rosemary, and I say something like, well, you know, being a mother seems to me to be a shaping experience, giving birth to a child, and it would probably influence one's image of God and be a crucial religious experience in life. And Rosemary looked at me and said, bullshit. As I always say, I didn't take it as an invitation to dialogue. It's whatever I mean by this radical feminism, I guess, was somewhere in that dialogue. I have great respect for Rosemary. I must say I wrote a chapter about it in my book, Contemporary Theologians, and I think her work, Sexism and God Talk, is a major important work, so on, so I'd put that in context. But that was the times, wasn't it? And Rosemary explained it. I cannot let you frame the discussion because I'll lose. I cannot let you, a man, say how we're going to look at religious experience. I'll tell you how I look at religious experience. You're not going to do it. And I think Rosemary had a very good point. I buy it in many ways. Third, a complementarity approach, which is shared, interestingly enough, by Carl Jung and Pope John Paul II. Interesting bedfellows on this one. So their idea of the male-female relationship is largely complementarity. You know, so we men are supposed to get in touch with our anima, and women are supposed to get in touch with their animus, and we're supposed to read Genesis with the Pope and see that the woman is a helpmate to the man and so on. I now think that none of that will work. I don't like those three options. And I don't know what to call the fourth one. I'll call it holistic, and I'll say how I think we have to look at it. A holistic approach that starts out like this, to take an example. We human beings are a mixture of this. We all crave intimacy. We all need intimacy to grow and develop. And we also all need independence. We need to be able to be autonomous in some ways and to achieve success. We all have fears of being alone, and we all have fears of failure. As I say those things, everybody in the room can recognize both sides of that description. Intimacy, fear of being alone, autonomy, independence, and the fear of failure. There's nobody in the room that's foreign to that. That language, of course, then can say, that mix is in everybody. The mix might be different. The mix will be different. We can say that. I might have a stronger need for intimacy, and you got a stronger need for independence. That might be. But nobody gets to be stereotyped that way. We don't have to stereotype men or women or anything. We can preach that way, teach that way without any worry. Well, that's how you can locate yourself. What's the big fear? To fail or to be alone? Now, statistically, if we do a survey, we know what's going to happen. More women are going to say intimacy is the dominant drive and the dominant fear is to be alone. More men are going to say I crave success, respect, and I fear failure. More of us will do that. But that's a secondary statement. We all understand to begin with. Both things are within us. And that, I think, is the way around the stereotyping that goes on. A way to talk about gender differences that gets away from the complementarity problem and all the things that the Pope and in his idea of defining men by their career and women by their domestic functions and so on gets us into. Or Jung. I think we have to reject Jung, despite the fact that he's been so influential on spirituality in many ways, and so much of the writing on this follows Jung. I think Rosemary's fundamentally right. It won't work. We have to get around it. Well, in our campus ministry staffs, we could well think of modeling this. This is vitally important. We find out as men and women how to work together without labeling, without stereotyping. Allow each one of us to get our mix of independence and intimacy into the picture, to try to work it out concretely. Someone said, stereotyping is a matter almost of laziness. It came out that we're having Margaret Farley talking at our place Sunday night. You're going to send some people up, Dan? Margaret Farley. Sunday night. She's terrific, as you know. Well, one of my friends, I invited him to talk. He says, she's just one of those feminists. I'm not coming. And another person pointed out, that's lazy thinking. Instead of reading something Margaret Farley wrote to see if it's good, bad, indifferent, whether he's got something to say, it's so easy. She's one of those feminists. I'm not going. We can't have that. We've got to find our way to deal with this. I'm thinking of the great importance of our marriage preparation courses. There's indications that these things really do good. David Olson, the University of Minnesota, studied 35,000 couples. There's a lot of empirical evidence that marriage preparation makes a difference. And boy, we could put our best efforts into that, and find our way to help those people to deal with the differences. I was telling Joe at lunch, if people read Judith Wallerstein's The Good Marriage, if you do marriage counseling or whatever, it represents a trend. Judith studied 50 successful, happy marriages. It's something like the thing that Jim Walsh did on priests. Grace Under Pressure, they studied successful, happy priests. Judith studies successful, happy marriages. And you learn a lot from that. Psychology, Joe can tell you, has been dominated by dysfunctional thinking. And there's a new trend here that can really help us. We begin to think about the healthy trends that people have. That's a good book for people doing marriage preparation, I think. I developed a whole spiritual approach to this. It's my next reflections article that I'm writing on the plane going home. Wallerstein has no sense of religion at all. No spiritual sense. But all she says can be put into a spiritual framework. That's the kind of thing we need to do. Last, are all the tensions within our own local faith community. So we're sitting there looking out at liberals and conservatives. We're looking at ecumenical Christians. Here's my favorite story about an ecumenical Christian. We have people every year that give a year of service to us at the university. It's a big contribution. They're giving up a year of grad school or $60,000 starting salary for a pharmacist or whatever. And so we had a young man who did this for 2 years. Comes from a good Catholic family and a big assistant to me, did a lot of research for me, very generous and so on, and involved liturgically and everything. So at the end of his 2 years, he comes to me and he says, well, he says, I've got to tell you something. He says, what? I got a background. Paul was married to a doctor, MD. His wife was going through residency while he was doing all this with us. So Paul comes to me and he says, got news to tell you. He says, what? What's that? He says, I'm going to the seminary. I've decided to go to the seminary. I said, Paul, that's wonderful. I'm glad. That's very good. Right. Paul says, would you write a letter of recommendation for me? Paul, after all you've given, I will write you a tremendous glowing recommendation. Where should I send it? Oh, he said, send it to the Lutheran seminary in Columbus. That's where I'm going. I'm going to the Lutheran seminary there. Paul says this without batting an eye, without giving it a thought. Worked with us for 2 years. In the seminary. That's what I mean by ecumenical Christian. You know? We all know that. We're looking out there in the congregation. We got a lot of Pauls. That's where they're at. They move out, marry somebody, marry a Methodist, they'll go to the Methodist church if it's better than the Catholic church.